Hey everyone, welcome to Learn DAX channel. My name is Siddesh and this is going to be a brief video on what a filter context is. So in my previous three videos, I discussed row context in SumX function, row context in filter function, and context transition in case of a calculate function. But what is filter context? And I just wanted to have a brief discussion on that. So without further ado, let's get started. So let's say I have this particular measure, which is the sales amount, right? Now, nowhere in this measure is it mentioning that if I pull this measure in the context of the region, then it should give me the value corresponding to the region. So I'll just clear this because I don't want to give any clue what I'm going up to right now. So let's say I pull this city table. I guess it will show the map. Let me change it to a table. So now look at this particular table, which has city in its rows. And now I have this particular measure called as a sales amount. Now, nowhere in this sales amount formula have I mentioned calculate sum of sales where city is equal to Albany or city is Albuquerque or city is Anchorage or Atlanta or Baltimore. Nowhere, right? But if I pull this sales amount on this table, let's see what happens. Now, this is interesting. Why does this measure starts to conform to the column that I've just pulled, wherein it is only showing me the sales amount for Albany or Albuquerque or Birmingham or Columbus or Chicago? Why? Because a filter context is active. And when that filter context is active, it is not going row by row and iterating the value. It is going to filter it at the data model level. So if I open this Excel sheet where it says that the filter context where it says is applied at the model engine level. Now, don't consider this that filter sales product is applied at the engine model level. Just take these words applied at the model engine level, wherein this particular condition where the city is Albany is being applied at the data model level itself, behind the scenes by Power BI. That's filter context. Now, if I pull the same sales amount in the context of a product, then the sales amount measure, even though it does not mention pull the value in the context of the men's apparel, it is still going to get filtered down. This is filter context, and this is the filter context that we talk about even in case of a calculate function where it is going to directly apply the filter at the model level itself, and this is going to enable us to have faster calculations as opposed to filtering row by row, going to the table, going scanning for the rows where there is the men's apparel condition is turning out to be true, then feeding that table to the calculate function, then calculating the sales amount. No, you don't want to iterate. You just want to apply the filter at the model level and then want to see the output. Now again, let's take the last example. Let's go with the retailer. Now if there's a retailer and the sales amount, then it is going to filter the value as per the retailer. Now what if there are more than one filters applied to this table, right? Now I'll just, and mind you, if I just pull the sales amount, the very sales amount, okay, in a card, see what I get. If I pull the sales amount in a card, what is this? I'll just have to, yeah, reduce the size. If I change this to 1.2 billion. Now see the similarity, 1.2 billion is getting added up in this case, in this case, in this case, as well as this case. So while there is no filter context active here, the filter context active here is retailer, the filter context active here is city, the filter context active here is product. It's essentially like calculate the sales amount where city is Albany. Now, if I add the product in this table, now the sales amount is getting filtered with two contexts. The first is the city, the second is the product, Albany and men's apparel. And if I again want to see the data at a much more granular level, then I can pull in the retailer. So if the city is Albany, the retailer is Kohl's, the product is men's apparel, then this is the sales amount. So this filtering is not happening because of filter function. This filtering is happening because of filter context. And that is what calculate uses in its context transition to convert the row context into filter context. Roughly that's what happens in the background, wherein the model itself is getting filtered down as opposed to going through the table, scanning it row by row, and then returning the table. Instead of that, the calculate function is simply going to uh, filter down that table using that values in that particular row. So this is filter context. I just wanted to briefly mention. And what was row context is essentially going back to this particular sheet. Row context is, hey, this is the measure. I want to calculate the sum. Go row by row. Take this row, third row, fourth row, and then keep calculating these values and then give me this value. That is row context. Row context iterates, filter context filters. As simple as that. Row context does not filter and filter context does not iterate. So if I go back to this Power BI, it might seem that this Albany is like there is a row context active here, but no, there is no row context active here. In fact, if I create a calculated column, or if I go to the sales table and if I create a calculated column, new column, and I call it, what should we call it? Sales calculated column is equal to sum x sales sales unit price. Is there a unit price? Unit sold into sales price per unit. Now see what happens. It is giving us the same value for all the rows. Why? Because there is no filter context active when we are creating that calculated column in a table. Whereas if I use the same measure and I pull this value, the same formula, right? Sum x sales unit sold in price per unit, it is giving me a different output because the filter context is active when I'm pulling it on the canvas. Whereas if I create the same measure or the same calculated column using the same formula, in case of a table, there is no filter context. Whereas the row context is active by default in case of a calculated column. So if I change it to unit sold into price per unit, it is going to give me the corresponding price, corresponding sales amount for each row. If I hit enter, you will see the difference. See, for the first row, this is the sales calculated amount, which is exactly the total sales. The second row, it is 101250. For the second row, it's 101250. So important thing to note here is that in case of a calculated column, when we create it in a table, the row context is always active, but the filter context is not. Whereas if the same, uh, we create the same metric using a measure and then try and pull that measure in the context of whatever we want to see, it is going to get filtered because the filter context in this case is always active. So I hope I have tried to explain the concept of filter context, row context in SumX, row context and filter context transition in these 4 videos. And it did shed some light on what you perceive as row context and filter context, and it did help you in gaining some understanding in those topics. And if you have any feedback, please leave it in the comments. If you have any doubt, I will try to explain to them. And yes, I'm excited to make more such videos. Until then, thanks for watching and happy learning.